and peace in order to build a thriving Nigeria for a global impact and influence. Our objective is to provide powerful community organizing and leadership tool, training and education, and as well build trust and collaboration between the Christian, Muslim, and tribes to take strategic action at the local and nations. Welcome you to this special and important platform where we are going to have a brilliant and important discussion on the topic blasphemy laws infringe the Nigerian Constitution. And the purpose of exploring these critical issues is aiming at raising awareness about the implication of blasphemy laws on individual in Nigeria. Here we have an expert who will share their insights and engage in a thought-provoking dialogue, who is in a person of a caller, Alapemi. I have not met him before, but it's a privilege to have him here on this discussion forum. He's an international human rights lawyer recognized for his tremendous and hard work in defending religious freedom. He has notably represented clients in high-profile blasphemy such as Omar Farouk, Aminu Sharif, to mention but few. It's a privilege having you here, Kola. You're welcome to this wonderful discussion forum. And at this point, I will introduce the founder, the CEO of the Nigerian Women Lead Movement in person of Soraya M. Dean, a Muslim feminist, the founder of Nigerian Women Lead, a lawyer, community organizer, and award-winning international activist. Soraya, you're welcome. I will invite you to give your goodwill message before you inviting caller for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth.
Soraya,
yes, thank you, Ruth. I'll be remiss in not remiss if I don't introduce you also. John, can you please handle the admit? We have other people who are waiting. I have made you a co-host. John or Dofa. There are others who are wanting to enter the room. So yes, no I'm Soraya Dean, and the lady who just spoke is of course my partner in crime, Ruth Abner, a fierce advocate for religious freedom, and she also works for the Nigerian Immigration Services. Together with her, we have worked for the last 7-8 years on this issue of mobilizing women in Nigeria. And I am so glad to report that we have done incredible work. Our work just appeared in a Taraba newspaper. I wonder whether Dofa can put it in the chat so people can see. So religious freedom in the United States is considered a sacred freedom. And when you look at countries that don't have this freedom, we get concerned and we want to support initiatives. And Nigeria particularly has many peacekeepers internationally, but it's sad that it has failed to secure its borders because in the United States, we flash a light on Nigeria for religious freedom. And it's not just Nigeria, world over we have religious freedom violations. And these freedom violations are neglected, festered, and most often gone out of control. And we don't know whether the fight is between tradition and progress, whether it's between authoritarianism and ignorance. But what we do know is infringing on the religious freedoms is testing the limits of free speech in a multi-world world. So I always begin by saying our work is working with the people on the ground. Nigeria is so vast. This morning I was speaking to the Religious Freedom Roundtable. I mean, Nigeria is the sixth most populated country in the world and the most populated in Africa. So what we say is we focus very narrowly on the building the base. So what my message has always been is that oppressed people do not need a messiah to deliver them from oppression. All they need is themselves, each other, and the will to persevere. And that is exactly what we're doing, building grassroots movements. And I hope, Dofa, did you put that article in the chat? Our work was featured in the Taraba newspaper just a few days ago. And you know, in that spirit, I was thinking. I met Kola several years ago, a passionate advocate for religious freedom, and I thought, you know, I remembered Nelson Mandela, who said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which can use to change the world, which we can use to change the world." And in Taraba State, we have a prolific youth group that is very, very interested in building this movement and advancing religious freedom and solidarity between the Christians and the Muslims. So the question for us to ask is, do Nigerians know their constitution? Do they know that these are rights that our speaker will tell us how far or how much they can go? So do they need to know more of their constitution? And for that, I say an unequivocal yes, because education is very critical for us to know. As Harriet Tubman, who freed slaves, she said, "I could have freed more slaves if only they knew they were slaves." So I believe that educating our youth on their constitutional rights and privileges is very critical for us at this time. So before I go any further, this program will be in 3 segments. I'm going to introduce Kola now, and then he's going to speak for about 15-20 minutes. Then I have 3 important questions to ask him, which I will. And then Ruth will take over, and we are going to open the floor to questions from you, audience. You can ask your questions directly from the presenter. And then we will close this program with a powerful message from our youth movement that we are building in Taraba. So Kola Alapeni is an international human rights lawyer. He's recognized for his work in defending religious freedom. He has notably represented clients in high-profile blasphemy cases in Kano, northern Nigeria. His efforts include providing pro bono legal defense for Omar Farouk Bashir, who was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for blasphemy, and Yahya Sharif Aminu, who faced a death sentence for the same charge. Both sentences were overturned by the courts of appeal, although Sharif Aminu's case is awaiting a Supreme Court decision. Alapini's work has earned him international recognition, including the U.S. Secretary of State's International Religious Freedom Award for his defense of religious challenges the constitutionality of Nigerian blasphemy laws. Alapeni graduated at the University of Ibadan, LLB with honors, and at the University of Essex, where he earned an LLM in international human rights law. He has been actively involved in advocacy for religious freedom on both national and international platforms. Kola, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm trying to see if I can put on my camera. Second. Hey, that's well. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for your generous introduction. I'd like to speak to us normally without using too much legalisms so that I can carry everybody along. I would start by telling you a story or two. These are real life stories of what we encounter on the field. In 2020, we heard the news that a musician was going to be sentenced to death in Kano, northern Nigeria. And the governor said he was going to sign the death warrant if an appeal was not filed. And so there was a lot of back and forth in the media. It was horrendous. So much international backlash that we were getting. And before you knew it, it was just a week before the deadline of the appeal. And so we had a WhatsApp group, which we had been chatting. And we said, oh, are we all just going to keep talking? Nobody's going to do anything because the various lawyers were trying to get access to him, and they were being prevented from seeing him. The president of the Korean Bar Association, he had sent a comprised of the officer to go to Kano State to go and file the appeal. Our colleagues in Kano switched off their phones because everybody was afraid for their lives and fearful of reprisal attacks. You have to remember that they live in Kano, their families are there, their business offices are all located there. So the lot fell on me to go and file this appeal. Since I lived in Abuja, which is 40 minutes flight from Kano, and I had schooled a bit in the north. So they thought, okay, why don't you go, Colin? You're the one who's studied international human rights law. Go and prove yourself. So we had to activate our boots on ground. And I went in disguise, dressed the way I am now, like a northerner. Fortunately, it was during the COVID year, so I had to wear my mask. And so nobody could identify me. And we have allies in northern Nigeria and contacted our allies. And I didn't let anybody know when I was going to arrive, just in case somebody squealed on me. It was that sensitive. So we went into the court registry, successfully filed the case. As soon as the court registrar saw the name Yahya Aminu Sharif, everybody got scared, and they were, oh my God, this case again. So we reassured them. We were very humble. We weren't throwing ourselves around like lawyers and everything. This boy needs to have his day in court. He was sentenced to death without legal representation. They were sympathetic to our case, and they helped us file it because they could be very uncooperative. These are Muslims as well. Their lives are on the threat. The Muslim ulama in Kano and the wider space in northern Nigeria had said nobody must come to his rescue, and if they do, they would face, they'll be dealt with. It was whilst filing for Yahya Aminu Sharif that we found out that there was someone else. There was a young boy who was a minor. He was underage. I think the media was reporting him as 13 at that time, but eventually we found out he was 16. This was after we got to court because nobody could get access to him. Notwithstanding, he was a minor. He has no business in an adult court. But I didn't have the papers to file his appeal with me. So I returned back to base. I had a debriefing session, and I said, hey, we left someone behind, and this boy is a child. Because Yahya was sentenced to 10 years to death, his case became better known than the minor who was sentenced to 10 years. So this boy was just languishing in jail, and we will have pretty much forgotten him. Everybody will have forgotten there was someone else. So they said, you have to go back. Nobody could sleep at night that day. So I had to go back to Kano 3 days after. We had to, basically amend the charge, our appeal, the notice of appeal, which we did for Yaya. We amended it since the cases were similar. It was for blasphemy. They were charged under the same section, section 382B, 382B of the Kano State Penal Code. Kano State Penal Code law of 2000. That's the main legislation in Kano State on Sharia. This document is a very mysterious document. You could hardly find it in the bookshops and bookstores. You can hardly find it in the bookstores. I had to get one of my colleagues to loan me his own. Eventually, when I was going to buy the book, I had known some people in power in Kano State in the court registry. They had the government printer printed only one, but they had run out of print. When we had built our sphere of influence, that was when they were able to bend over backwards. So we filed the appeal in a nutshell, and we challenged this was just 7 days to the expiration of they were sentenced to on the 10th of August, on the 3rd of August, on the 3rd of September, which would have been 1 week to the expiration. Yaya Amina appeal.
Can we all mute, please? Can we all mute?
Thank you. So on the 3rd of September, 2020, Yaya's case was filed. I remember I told you I went to Abuja and had to return again, and we filed Omar Farouk's case on the 7th of September. It was just 3 days before the expiration. As a matter of fact, 2 days before the expiration, because you have to count 1 day less. And we challenged it. We challenged the convictions on various angles. The first was that it was a violation of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Section 34, for instance. It's a violation of the right to dignity. We challenged it on international law grounds. It's a violation of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and various international legislations which Nigeria has signed up to, like the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the ICCPR. These are all legislations international law treaties which we have voluntarily signed to. So that's the brief story of Omar Farouk and Yaya Amini Sharif. If you remember, there was the NSAS riots in 2020. So the initial court date for the hearing could not be heard because of those disturbances. So we had to adjourn. I sent someone to take a date. And eventually we were able to argue the appeal in November 2020, and judgment was reserved for January 2021. So in January 2021, the court set Omar Farouk free completely and agreed with us that he's a minor. He has no reason to be in an adult court, and he didn't have legal representation. In Yaya Amini Sharif's case, that was more political. He ought to have been set free completely as well for being sentenced to death without legal representation and for all those violations which I mentioned. But I think the government was trying hard not to upset the people, and he was sent to be tried the Sharia court again. He will have had to enter Farouk out on Monday morning from prison, and we filed an appeal that Monday as well regarding Yamin Sharif. And then the journey to the courts upstairs started. The second appeal now at the Court of Appeal, which was sitting in Kano Division, the judges could not agree amongst themselves if Nigeria is a secular country or not. We also quoted Section 10 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which states that no government, state or federal, should adopt a religion. And we said the practice of the Sharia law in northern Nigeria is, in essence, an adoption of religion. The judges could not, the president, the presiding judge of the Court of Appeal, ruled in our favor regarding the fact that it should not be sent back for a retrial, and that it was inhuman and double jeopardy. But on the issue of whether Sharia law was inconsistent with the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria or not, all the three judges agreed. They said Sharia was consistent and it should be sent back. So we had one dissenting opinion and two judges against us. So we challenged this again to the Supreme Court. And our argument is very simple. Section 10 of the Constitution is being violated. Our argument is that Nigeria is a multi-religious country and a secular country, and the government is getting involved in religious matters, and it should not. We argued that Section 34 is being violated. We have in the Sharia. So what we did was to narrow down our arguments and say, hey, you have a law called the Kano State Sharia Penal Code Law of 2000, which actually in the bodies of these laws says that you can chop someone's hands off. If they steal, you chop off the right hand. If they steal again, you chop off the left leg for balance, I guess. And if they steal again, you chop off another hand. And then if he steals again, you chop off another leg. You cannot be chopping off limbs. It's a violation of Section 34. You can also not be stoning people to death. And even this Sharia law is discriminatory. If a woman commits adultery, you say you want to stone them to death, but you don't do anything to the man who she has had an affair with. So that's discrimination. This law is not punishing both people who you have alleged of the offense. We also have a law that allows you to marry into Nigeria, became a senator, and he married a 13-year-old girl. And he says he's allowed under the Sharia. And we're saying this law that allows you to marry a 13-year-old girl is actually a violation of the laws of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, because Nigeria is a signatory to the Child Rights Convention, which is an international legislation. And a 13-year-old girl is a minor. She's not a woman yet. And going further, Nigeria domesticated the Child Rights Convention as an act of parliament, as an act of National Assembly. The northern states refused to domesticate this law, obviously, because they would be in violation and they would not be able to marry underage children. It's now drawn to it because we're before the courts. You have to make a decision one way or the other, and you have to be mindful of our international law obligations, because when international law, under Nigerian law, when international law and domestic law clashes, international law reigns supreme. So you cannot turn a blind eye to this. So that's where we are. We're expecting, it's now in the registry of the courts. We have a suit number. We've served Kano State. They have refused to respond. This is their normal style. They normally would not respond until the court issues a hearing notice, and then they turn up and they just recycle the same argument again. In contrast to Omar Farouk's case and Yahya Aminu Sharif, I would like to draw your attention to the case of Deborah Samuel Yakubu. We were actually at the Court of Appeal on one of the days when we were going to sit, but the court didn't sit that day. So we left the court early. And as soon as we got back to the hotel, we were hearing that someone had been lynched in Sokoto State. Deborah she was a student of the Shehu Shagari College of Education in Sokoto State. And there was a WhatsApp group that had been set up for classwork. And some of our classmates started sending Islamic verses to the WhatsApp group. And you know how it is when you set up a group for a primary purpose and people just start sending irrelevant messages and clog up the channel. So she said they should stop. This was not the reason why the group was set up for. An argument ensued. Maybe someone said, oh, this is, we're talking about Allah, you know, and she must have retorted, oh, what God, what Allah, and that was what got her in trouble. And the stalking started. Someone identified her, pointed out that that's the girl. They started throwing stones and sticks. I actually met a cousin when I went to Jos a couple of months ago, who was there when this attack happened. And she said that the newspapers and the media did not get the full story. That when they were being attacked, the security tried to rescue them and put them in the security lodge, which is usually like a small building near the gates of the school. And this people went to reinforce and came back, and they were charging at the security house, pouring petrol under the door to set the security house on fire. And the attack went on for almost 8 hours. All through this period, the police were not called. Even if they were called, they didn't come into the campus. They stayed outside until the mob overwhelmed the security forces. The school security, they are unarmed. That at most, as you know, they will just have a baton. And they charged and broke the door, and eventually they overpowered and got in. Anyway, sorry about the noise. It's coming from the ice maker in the refrigerator. So it's gone off now. And the cousin was lucky to escape, but Deborah couldn't escape. She was pilloried with sticks and stones. Someone got the petrol and that person struck the match. It was recorded. I was going to share some of the pictures and videos. I just wanted to spare you of the gory sights. That's why I didn't send it again, Soraya. And it was all documented. The police saw them. They have these videos and everything. They were arrested. 2 people were arrested. And in contrast to the 2 earlier cases, which I told you, Omar Farouk and Yahya Aminu Sharif, where they struggled to get legal representation because they were under threat, 34 lawyers, led by a full professor of law, turned up to defend the assailants of Deborah Samuel Yakubu, to defend them. So that tells you the acceptability of these egregious acts, these heinous acts in northern Nigeria. Eventually, the police did not prosecute diligently. They refused to turn up in court. And a couple of months after, the court quietly discharged these two people who had been arraigned, discharged them for want of diligent prosecution. It was not very publicized in the media, as you know, once people's attention shifts, that's it. You also have the last case, which I'm going to cite, is Rhoda Jatao, the mother of 5 in Bauchi State, when she found out that the attackers of Debra Sano Yakubu had been set free by the court. She made a post on Facebook criticizing the police and the government, and she was arrested in Bauchi State, that she was inciting the public, and she spent 19 months in detention. The government just kept her away, locked her up, until we started an international outcry. My colleague, Sean Nelson, and I went on Twitter and eventually supported the legal team, a friend of ours who took up the matter. And quietly, when the government noticed that there was so much international attention, the Bauchi state government, she was released. And a couple of weeks ago, the case was discharged because the government didn't turn up anymore. So in essence, you can see how even the government aids the perpetration of these atrocities, and they are bullies. Once you challenge them and they know that there's international attention, they'll run away. That's what they do. And you will also notice the sporadic attacks in northern Nigeria. Could be a butcher in Sokoto State today. Could be an Okada man in Abuja tomorrow. All someone has to just say is to point to you and say you abused Allah or you said something against Islam. The crowd don't want to know what happened, and they just descend on you. In minutes, you're gone. It's a mob action. It doesn't take up to 10 minutes. They just pounce on you and start throwing stones and sticks. Someone brings petrol, someone brings a match, and that's it. So I'm going to round up now. I've mentioned Section 10 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which is the principal section that says no state or federal government should get involved. Section 38 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria also gives you a right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This particular section took care of apostasy laws because Nigeria is one of the 7 countries in the world where you could get killed for blasphemy. But we don't have apostasy laws in Nigeria by virtue of this section of the Nigerian Constitution, because you have a right to change your mind. You could change it to any religion or not have a religion. That's what Section 38 does. In Chapter 4 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, this is what it looks like, but there are various editions in the market. That's what it looks like. Section 45, Chapter 4 of the Constitution deals with it's a Bill of Rights and deals with various rights, right to dignity, right to religion, etc. However, not all those rights are absolute. If you go to Section 45 of that Constitution, and I'll just read it out briefly. So Section 45 says nothing's in sections 37, 38, which I just quoted on the right to religion, right to freedom of thought, Section 39, Section 40, and 41 of this Constitution shall invalidate any law that is reasonably justifiable in a democratic society. 45 1A now says, in the interest of defense, public safety, public order, public morality, or public health. So, and then Section 45 1B says, for the purpose of protecting the rights and freedoms of other persons. What Section 5 is saying is that, yes, we have a Bill of Rights, which Chapter 4 deals with, but your rights are not absolute. We can curtail those rights in defense of public safety, public order, public morality, so those rights can be breached. Say, for instance, if there's an health emergency like COVID, then you cannot say, oh, I have the right to freedom of movement because there can be a curfew, etc. But what we narrowly miss when they're trying to curtail those rights under Section 45 is that Section 34, which I quoted first, is a powerful legislation. It is not curtailed. It's an absolute right. Section 34, which is a right to dignity, is not prohibited by this ouster clause of Section 45. And what does Section 34 say? If you go to Section 34, I'm going to read out so that you get an idea of what it says. Section 34 says, I'll just quote the first section. Every individual is entitled to respect for the dignity of his person, and accordingly, A, no person shall be subjected to torture or to inhuman or degrading treatment. No person shall be held in slavery or servitude. No person shall be required to perform forced or compulsory labor. If we restrict ourselves to Section 34 1A, no person shall be subjected to torture or to inhuman or degrading treatment, which I said is an absolute right because it's not curtailed by Section 45. It is absolute. Then it means we cannot chop off people's limbs. That's what it means, because that is torture and degrading treatment. So the Sharia law, as the criminal aspects of Sharia law, is going to fail of Section 34 of the Constitution because it's an absolute right. It also means that you cannot flog people or lash people 40 lashes, 80 lashes, etc., because that's torture and degrading treatment. So that is part of our argument. When the government keeps saying, "Oh, if fundamental human rights is not absolute; it's qualified. Your right stops where another person's begins, but Section 34 is absolute." So it will be interesting to see how the Supreme Court is going to rule vis-a-vis our obligations under international law, which we willingly signed up to. Except we remove ourselves from these international instruments, we cannot practice the criminal aspects of Sharia law as it is. We don't have any problem with Sharia law because the Constitution limits the practice of Sharia law to Islamic personal law. If you look at Section 277 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, where it establishes Sharia Court of Appeal, etc., it mentions Islamic personal law, and that's got to do with inheritance. You want to marry up to 4 wives, and you can afford it, fine. The provision is there to deal with that. How do you how is your inheritance dealt with when you're gone? How your succession laws, etc. That's the only provision that we have in the Nigerian Constitution regarding Sharia law. It is Islamic personal law. So this criminal law that was introduced post 1999, when we returned back to civilian rule, it's an aberration. It's a tool of oppression by the governors who introduced it, and allegedly rumored that a lot of them get funding from Islamic countries to say, hey, we're implementing Sharia law in northern Nigeria. Recommendations, as I round up. I am an advocate for international sanction. Weeks ago, the Canadian government announced the sanctions of current and former officials of the Venezuelan government in activities that have directly or indirectly supported human rights violations in Venezuela. Nigerians, we are great travelers and we're very adventurous. There's almost no country where you don't find us. If we, and I've been a champion of this kind of sanction against the states where the Sharia law is being practiced in northern Nigeria, the criminal aspects of Sharia law, where these blasphemy laws are being implemented or people are being stoned to death right under the nose of the governors. This jungle justice is being perpetuated and the government is doing nothing. This sanction can be applied to these to the governors of the states and their immediate family, preventing them from seeking medical attention in the West, preventing their children from coming to school in the West, preventing their wives from shopping in the West. That will go a long way. I have also advocated for Nigeria to go back to the country of particular concerns list by the Secretary of State. This is very important because there's evidence, empirical evidence, that the killings spiked in northern Nigeria immediately. The previous US administration removed Nigeria from the country of particular concerns list. We're hoping, well, I am hoping that now that we have a new administration, Senator Marco Rubio is an ally. He had tweeted support for Yahya Aminu Sharif in the past. I would book an appointment to see him when I go to Washington next month for the International Religious Freedom Summit. As you know, my humble self is an awardee of the Secretary of State, so I'm hoping that should not be difficult to have an interface with him and say, hey, we really need you to step up now. And then continuous engagement such as this, which Soraya has put together, and women of northern Nigeria, continuous engagements, collaborations, education, letting people know what is going on, because unfortunately, northern Nigeria is not a safe space to have this kind of discussions. You don't know if you are in a physical building, you don't know if you have spies amongst you, you don't know who's going to say something and Isba is going to come and clamp down on you. But at least here's a safe space virtually where we can have this kind of discussion and you can involve more people from northern Nigeria to have this discussion and they feel safe, they don't feel threatened. Thank you very much for listening patiently. I will end here and take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kola. My gosh, I'm like, it's utterly depressing to say the least, you know, because I feel this level of tolerating the intolerance has become normalized in Nigeria. And we are grassroots activists. I had 3 major questions, but because we are running out of time, I want, as a Muslim woman, I feel personally responsible to speaking to this event, speaking to this issue, because I know as you referred to the Kanu State Penal Code, it is based on Sharia law. Sharia law has a strong ground on radical Islam, which is political Islam, and it becomes an ideological warfare. So how do we attack the ideology? How can we amplify more moderate Muslims' voices rather than just saying, reaching compromise by saying most contemporary Muslims practice their faith peacefully and tolerantly, but small radicals do not. That will not get us any far anymore. So I will ask one question. People like us, grassroots activists, we bring together Muslim and Christian women together. And we want to have the tough conversations. Do you see a hope in that. And what can you tell whoever who is on this call about mobilizing and building solidarity with people of different faith, not for the sake of having a meal, but how can we go deeper into the conversation of the radicalization and the violence?
Thank you very much. First, be safe. That's the first thing I'm going to tell you. Be safe. Do not take anything for granted. You never know who is going to turn coat on you. Once you've established your safe boundaries, then identify your allies. Identify people who you can open up to. And I would suggest to start gradually with this kind of collaboration that you're doing virtually. That way you are not all in one space at the same time discussing this, because I tell you, you cannot guarantee what will happen if you're in core northern Nigeria with the Islamic police. But with this kind of collaboration that you're doing, it's virtual, it's a safe space, and then you start talking, know your law like we have done now, know your law, know your Islamic law. I know you're very vast in Islamic law, Suraya, and you're practicing Muslim. And when we went to the UN in New York a couple of years ago, I know that you were advocating that this is not what the Quran says and everything. So when you're on the right footing with the right literature, the right law, both Islamic and international law, then you have identified your allies. The women are effective agents of change, because the teaching starts from the home, and you're able to connect with the mothers and the women, and then gradually, it's not going to happen overnight, but at least you can start somewhere and start with something. That's what I'm going to say. But please remember, safety first. Don't try and be a hero.
Thank you so much.
Or a hero in this case.
Yeah. you said about extending sanctions and restrictions internationally, and I was listening to Professor Soyinka, who said to also call for the opening of all the extrajudicial cases to be reopened.
Yes.
I think, yeah, that's something like when we raise the collective consciousness, we hope women will come together and in unison call these things out.
Yes,
that's the goal.
Yeah, that's very important.
Yeah.
And Professor Soyinka is an advocate for this for freedom of religion. No matter what religion you are, just be yourself. Nobody should compel you to worship God in a certain form of way. And I sent that video to the group.
Yes.
I also going to include it in part of our advocacy, is that all these cases should be reopened. Once the criminal cases are reopened, I think it's going to be a check on what's going on.
Thank you. So let's open it out to questions from people in the audience. Please unmute and ask a question from Kola.
Okay, let me go first. I have just one question.
Very short, yes.
Yes, my question is how my question.
Go ahead, please. My question is.
Okay, my question is, how does this Sharia law align with the Nigerian constitution?
Doesn't. Sharia law is inconsistent with the Nigerian constitution, especially the Sharia criminal law. Maybe what aligns with the Nigerian constitution is the Islamic personal law. That's the only part that the Sharia provided for. And the British when they were colonial masters, that's what they settled for. Because you have to realize that Nigeria was a country of two nations. There was northern Nigeria and southern Nigeria, and then there was an amalgamation. So in northern Nigeria, the British had to do away. They told them, you cannot practice this. It's repugnant to natural justice. equity, and good conscience. And in southern Nigeria, we also had to do away with some things. For instance, there used to be the killing of twins. They were put to death because the twins were seen as a strange birth in those days. So there had to be a compromise. They had to delete that from our customary law. It was not allowed. There was injustice to widows, for instance. If a woman lost her husband in the olden days, the natural suspicion is to think that the woman killed the husband, and then they would force the woman to shave her head or to stay in the same room with the corpse for a day or two. In some communities, they would, when they wash the corpse, they would ask the woman to drink out of the water, and if she doesn't die, then it means she didn't kill the woman. So all these practices were done away with and made to conform with acceptable laws. So it was after 1999, the first time in decades where the North was not in power, that the northern governor started this, and then all the other states just duplicated it. I think it's very selfish. Anytime northern Nigeria is not in power, that is what you see. They throw tantrums and just try to destabilize the polity. It was the duty of the Attorney General of the Federation to have gone to the Supreme Court immediately and sued these states, maybe the first states that tried it, and allowed the Supreme Court to make a decision, because it's not a political question. It's a judicial question that needs to be answered. It's a constitutional question. The government then, headed by a Southerner, was not popular in the South. He lost election in his ward. He was a former military man. He lost election in his ward. He was not popular. He was seen as a northern candidate. And it was the votes from the North that made him president. So he didn't want to rock the boat. It was a selfish decision because he also thought of a country, not just himself. And when journalists asked him why the government was not taking it up, he said, "Oh, it's a political thing. It's going to blow away." It hasn't blown away for over 2 decades now.
I'm going to ask a quick question because this was something I really meant to ask. What is at stake today? This I asked because I might be the only Muslim woman on this call. No, there are others, yes. What is at stake, Kola, I believe is an Islamic revival movement, of caliphates and mercenaries dreaming to fight and establish Islamic government, anything to do with Western. So do you think there is an underlying movement wants to establish Sharia law in Nigeria? Is it that pervasive?
It's an hypothesis, but I think it's poverty. People are poor in Nigeria, significantly poorer than in the South, and jobless, unemployed. You have an army of youth that are unemployed. If people are gainfully employed and they're making their money, nobody's going to be a tool for a politician, or nobody's going to be joining all these movements and be carrying weapons and going to the bush. It's idleness. There's no money. There's no job. If people are gainfully employed, or you're going to school, you're comfortable, you're not going to go and be sleeping in the forests and say you are a freedom fighter or declaring. What are you declaring? The children of the rich and the children of the emirs and all the rich people, because they have education and there's money, they don't like a life of discomfort. All these things that we're saying, the primary driver of this is poverty and unemployment. That's what I think.
If you all have any further questions, who wants to ask another quick question? If not, I'm going to give it over to John and Dofa to close. Thank Mr. Kola and close this case. If you have any questions, because we are 5 minutes away, if you can post those questions, we'll get answers. Anybody, we can have room for a quick question. Okay. Dofa.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barrister Kola, for this wonderful discussion. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Do we have anyone that has a question, one or two, because of the time factor? The floor is open, please.
Yeah, I have a small question and
Okay, go ahead.
a small contribution. Thank you so much, Barrister, for such a very wonderful presentation. For me, it's an eye-opener. I work for an organization that deals with issues of migration, and a large number of the survivors or victims we have are victims of religious persecutions coming from those parts of the country where religious persecution is prominent. So my question is, what is the provision of the law that protects victims of religious persecution in Nigeria? Because I ask because there seems to be no no protection, or there are no measures to protect victims of this. Hence, it leads them to contemplating irregular migration even beyond the shores of this country. And in the end, it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem for us. This is my question. Thank you.
Yeah. Section 10 of the Constitution, Section 34 of the Constitution, and the principal legislation is Section 38 of the Constitution. And you also have the international instruments which I had mentioned, the ICCPR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. ICCPR is International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. Nigeria is a signatory, and more importantly, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. These are the principal legislations that protect. It is not that we don't have these laws. It's a lack of governmental will to protect the vulnerable, and that is why people want to flee. For example, the killers of Deborah Samuel Yakubu roaming free, whilst a woman who said the people who killed Deborah are free, and that's the woman that now gets arrested. So it's this imbalance that makes people want to flee. The laws are there. When we challenge the government on Rhoda Jatau, you see, they discharged quietly and they ran away. They didn't make a fuss about it. They don't like to publicize it. They ran away. Once you challenge them, they are bullies. So the laws are there, but people just don't get justice. What they get is judgment. There's a whole difference between judgment and justice. And eventually, the people get tired and they just run away. They just flee. If there's no one that comes to their rescue, they just give up. That's why you see people fleeing. If the government were to, do what government does and stands for its citizens, then you wouldn't have that crisis that we have now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is really helpful for me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Dofa and John, do you want? Yes. Nadine, yes.
We're going to have time now.
This is just very quick, and it's not a question. It is just thank you. And I'm new to this conversation in this context with my longtime friend, Soraya. I am in Michigan, and the temperature is 4 degrees here right now. But my father was a pastor in the United Methodist Church, and he lived and bled and died for the people of Africa. So I'm getting to experience a little bit of his legacy here, and I send my absolute deepest love to all of you. You are loved above all else. That's what we all need to know, because when I believe anyone is exercising force over the oppressed, somewhere in them, they're broken and need love and validation, and think that force and violence is a way to it. And we all know it isn't. So from what I can do here in this little moment, I send my love and greatest admiration to all of you.
Thank you. I have family in Michigan. My uncle has been there for like 50 years. I used to visit if it's not summer. So my sympathies to you in -4.
I have no sympathy needed when I listen to your story. I'm in a beautiful empty house. These people are in Florida for 3 months and they're like, use our heat, eat our food, sleep in our bed, have fun. So I'm just.
Paula lives in California.
So.
She also with California, Nigeria.
She's in, yes. And Nadine is on our resource stream moving forward. She's an ardent churchgoer, and we are reaching out to the Christian communities in America, especially Michigan, to support this work. Thank you, Nadine.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate your presence. Beautiful. John and Dofa, we need to close.
All right.
And also, yes, I need to announce we'll be doing this series every month. We have top speakers lined up because we feel education is liberation, and we want to share knowledge. Yes, somebody wants to speak. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Soraya.
Please close it up. Yes.
All right. I'm John. On behalf of Nigerian Women Leads and the youth and everyone present, we want to extend our gratitude to our speaker, Mr.
Yes, John, go ahead.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So on behalf of Nigerian Women Leads and youth and everyone present here, I want to extend our gratitude to Allah for sharing his and this powerful insight on this we're discussing. And the dedicated lawyer and advocate for victims of violence, and we want to appreciate of right, even when there was not.
Can't hear.
The audio is.
So can you hear me?
Yes, this is. It was. We couldn't hear you before.
All right. The experience you shared and the experiences have shed light, and the challenge has also shown us the challenge in face by. It's not. It's very hard to live in the north to express yourself, and because this issue is very risky, and you really told us we need therefore having this series. We're going to be with all the needs so that we can keep educating. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure speaking on this inaugural series. Soraya, happy that this is happening. You've put in so much relentless efforts in support of our country, women of Nigeria. Thank you. I see my sister Fatima Njoku there. Thank you for joining. And everybody who took time to join. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kola. I want to leave us with this word. Malala Yousafzai, that girl who was shot in the head for promoting education, she said, one pen, one book, one teacher can change the world. So today, let's hope, Kola has educated me tremendously on the issue of looking at the Nigerian constitution and how the Sharia is impacting that. I hope it has been so valuable to you all as well. Let's continue the conversation. Blessings, Kola. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.